Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Business. So, this is the last episode of the Powered by the Past before we start moving further on. And in the previous episode, we talked about water, about stability, about energy systems designed to last for decades, and the limits that come with that kind of permanence. Today, we move to a very different source of power, one that doesn't rely on rivers, weather, or combustion. One that compresses enormous amounts of energy into very small space, and that is nuclear energy. Few technologies in the modern history have carried such a contradictory identity. For some, nuclear represents ultimate efficiency and control. For others, it represents risk, fear, and irreversible failure. But before we talk about safety perception and controversy, we need to slow the story down again because nuclear energy didn't enter the system as an experiment. It entered as a solution. And understanding what problem it was designed to solve explains almost everything that followed. Okay, by the middle of the 20th century, energy systems were reaching a new limit. Fossil fuels had delivered scale, mobility, and growth, but they also introduced dependence, volatility, and visible pollution. Hydropower had provided stability, but geography kept its expansion. Industry was growing faster than landscapes could support. What nuclear offered was not just another fuel, it offered a different ratio. An unprecedented energy density, a small physical footprint, electricity that did not depend on weather, rivers, or continuous fuel logistics. By the 1950s and 1960s, nuclear power was framed as the next step in industrial maturity. If demand was going to keep growing, energy needed to be concentrated, predictable, and controllable. For the moment, it looked like the perfect answer. Electricity without smoke, without fuel trains, without dams reshaping entire valleys. But nuclear also changed the nature of risk. Energy production was no longer something that failed gradually. It became something that could fail suddenly. And when it did, the consequences were no longer local or temporary. They were systemic. This is where nuclear energy truly became powered by the past. Designed in an era that believed engineering could eliminate uncertainty and deployed into the world that slowly proved otherwise. Let's start with the site that shaped global perception of nuclear energy more than any other: Chernobyl. Before 1986, reactor Unit 4 produced roughly 1000 megawatt of electricity. It was part of a system designed to deliver stable, low carbon power to an industrial economy. From a purely operational perspective, it worked until it didn't. In a single night, effective system output collapsed to 0%. The reactor exploded, releasing radioactive material across large parts of Europe. Entire cities were evacuated, a permanent exclusion zone was created, one that still exists today. At that point, carbon intensity no longer mattered. What mattered was irreversibility. Chernobyl was not a failure of nuclear physics, it was a failure of governance, safety culture, and institutional feedback. Errors were hidden, warnings were ignored. The system was optimized for output, not for stopping itself. This case revealed something nuclear energy would never escape. When failure happens, it does not scale linearly, it overwhelms everything around it. France's nuclear fleet. Let's talk about that. Now, uh, we can discuss something opposite. France made a fundamentally different choice. Nuclear energy was not treated as a prestige project or a short term fix, it was treated as infrastructure. Today, nuclear power provides roughly 65-70% of France's electricity. The fleet consists of 56 reactors with a combined installed capacity of about 61 gigawatts. Average capacity factors sit around 70-75%, delivering predictable power year after year. Life cycle carbon emissions among the lowest of any large scale energy source, comparable to wind and lower than solar when storage is included. Nuclear electricity supports cities, heavy industry, transport, and exports. There have been incidents, reactors are aging, maintenance costs are rising, but there has been no systemic loss of control. This is nuclear energy operating close to its intended logic, centralized and disciplined, regulated. Not because it is risk free, but because risk is assumed, designed for, and continuously managed. Here, nuclear does exactly what it was meant to do, provide stable, low carbon base power at scale. Between these two extremes lies a case that defines nuclear energy in the real world. Fukushima Daiichi. Before 2011, the plant supplied around 4.7 gigawatts of capacity and functioned as a normal part of Japan's energy system. When the earthquake struck, the reactors shut down automatically, exactly as designed. What failed was not the shutdown, it was the assumption about the external risk. The tsunami flooded backup power systems, cooling was lost, multiple reactors experienced core meltdowns, effective system output again dropped to 0%, and the cost shifted from technical to social, economic, and spatial. Japan shut down its nuclear fleet, then slowly and cautiously began restarting parts of it under new regulatory frameworks. Nuclear energy did not disappear, it became conditional. This case shows nuclear as it is actually exists, highly efficient under normal conditions, extremely sensitive to low probability, high impact events, neither a miracle nor a disaster by default. At this point, nuclear energy usually disappears from the conversation, not because it stopped working, but because it became uncomfortable to explain, and that discomfort has very little to do with physics. It comes from how safety is actually constructed. Nuclear safety standards are often imagined as a technical checklist. In reality, they are institutional agreements. A typical international nuclear safety standard takes 3 to 5 years to move from planning to publication. Expert groups drafted, states negotiated, consensus is built line by line. Feedback only arrives after implementation. The process is really slow because in high risk systems, it matters as much as precision. And this is where the structural mismatch appears. Technology evolves in months, energy markets shift in weeks. Geopolitical risk emerge in days. Operational decisions are made in hours. Safety standards by design move in years. As a result, they are always reactive. They don't describe future risks, they codify past experience. Every rule exists because something has already gone wrong somewhere else. There is always a time gap between reality and regulation. This leads to another uncomfortable truth. Compliance is not safety. In real operations, safety comes from system design, human judgment, operational culture, early signal detection, and decisions made outside the written standard. So, standards provide a baseline, they don't provide protection. Speeding up formal standards is not the solution. Accelerating them would reduce trust, fragment regulatory baselines, and create incompatible national rules. In nuclear systems, fragmentation is more dangerous than delay. The only model that works is dual speed governance. And the fast operational layer built on interim guidance, living documents, peer learning, real time feedback, and adaptive risk management. Real safety lives in the fast layer. Standards follow later. This also explains why nuclear energy struggles to fit modern narratives. It does not align with fast ESG cycles. It takes 10 to 15 years to build, requires enormous capital, and delivers returns slowly. Wind turbines and solar panels, they're pretty much well. Reactors, cooling loops, and exclusion zones, they don't. Silence, however, does not mean failure, and this blind spot is not unique to nuclear. The same structural lag appears in energy transitions, transport growth, waste systems, and ESG regulation. Institutions keep optimizing frameworks, while systems keep generating new risks faster than those frameworks can absorb. The real question is not whether we have enough standards. The real question is whether our institutions are capable of seeing risk before it becomes standardized history. So, when we talk about energy, it's worth pausing for the moment, not to debate technologies, targets, or timelines, but look at the pattern underneath all of it. Again and again, we measure what systems deliver today: megawatts, terawatt hours, efficiency ratios. And far less often we ask what they leave behind tomorrow. Because what we usually call progress is often a trade across time. Effects are moved forward, consequences are pushed outward. And the system keeps working just long enough for the cost to disappear from the view. We don't produce clean energy. We trade impacts today for waste tomorrow. And the real question has never been whether we do this. The real question is who ultimately pays for the consequences and how consciously the choice is made. This was Beyond the Business. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.